on, etc., etc. All the places that just kind of remind you that you're home. So thank you all for your warm welcome every time that Brandon and I come. So I want to talk to you guys about Epiphany this morning. So a week before Christmas, I met my friend Jan for coffee at Starbucks. So Jan and I met at Oakdale Church in Olney, Maryland, same place that I met Hannah. Jan would come to Oakdale's staff lounge on her lunch break, just for a change of scenery, and the two of us would start talking. I would be making copies or printing materials, and soon the two of us started to intentionally get together outside of work hours to talk about whatever it is we found ourselves talking about, be it God, running gear, craft, food, and drink. Well, as Jan and I are standing in the Starbucks line, Jan asks me, where had I seen God this week? I thought about it, and I thought, in a not so serious way, and I told her so, Jan, I see God right here as I stand here in line with you. Well, yes, of course, Jan said, and the two of us had a good chuckle. And then Jan got a serious look on her face, and she said, you know, Cristin, it really is important to notice God's presence. It reminds us that we are not alone. Now, had Jan asked me the question of where I'd see God this week, had she asked me this after today, I may have given her a different answer. Today is the day of Epiphany, and it's the day that the historical church celebrates God's revelation revealed to the wise men in the baby Jesus. It is celebrated 12 days after Christmas, and the 12 days signify the 12 days that it took the wise men to get to Jesus in Bethlehem. Epiphany is from the Greek, meaning to appear or to be made manifest. Author Thomas Keating, in his book, The Mystery of Christ, talks about Epiphany, saying, Epiphany is the full revelation of all that the light of Christmas contains. Christmas is the celebration of divine light breaking into human consciousness. This light is so bright that it is hard at first sight to grasp its full meaning. Only later, as our eyes adjust to the light, can we perceive little by little all that is contained in this mystery. Together with the wise men, we see the manifestation of the divine in the babe of Bethlehem. Today, perhaps with our eyes still adjusting to the light of Christmas, let us journey again to where the wise men went to see God's revelation in the babe of Bethlehem. Perhaps together we can perceive little by little all that this mystery contains. This story can be found in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him worship. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for as it had been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people Israel. And then Herod secretly called for the wise men, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him worship. When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and worshipped him. And then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This story begins making it clear that Jesus was born in the time of King Herod. King Herod was known for acting savagely against his rivals, particularly Jewish rivals. When King Herod heard from the wise men that the King of the Jews had been born, alongside the prophecy that out of Bethlehem would become a ruler greater than he, Herod becomes frightened, and feeling that his rule is threatened, goes to the wise men and tries to trick them, saying, "You go, tell me where Jesus is, and then return to me with this location, and I will come and worship him." Though we know later in chapter 2 that King Herod had no plans of worshiping Jesus. For when he found out that the wise men weren't coming back to tell him where Jesus was, he decreed that all the boys under the ages of 2 in and around Bethlehem be killed. And of course, he was hoping that he could kill Jesus. Now, the wise men were astrologers. Back in ancient times, people understood the stars and constellations as providing frame of reference for where the divinity lay. And of course, this star took the wise men to where the babe of Bethlehem lay, the Son of God. The wise men were also Gentiles, not Jews. As Gentiles, the wise men didn't ask Herod where the king of Israel lay. They asked where the king of the Jews lay. And yet, despite being Gentiles and not Jews, God chose to reveal a holy star to them, Gentiles, calling them and guiding them towards God's manifestation in Jesus. Let us recall together Thomas Keating's insight that the light of Christmas is so bright that it is hard at first sight to understand its full revelation, that only after our eyes can become adjusted to the light can we see all that is contained in this mystery. Perhaps in Epiphany, our eyes are invited to zoom out from the baby Jesus, God with us in the flesh, to include all those that God called to worship Jesus. Now, 12 days after Christmas, we can look around Jesus' nativity and perceive the good news of God's incarnation is not only ours individually, but all peoples and creatures, Gentiles, Jews, shepherds, angels, women, men, animals, land, and us. Epiphany makes clear that God's incarnation is the bright light that shines upon the world's darkness and reveals to all of us still that we are all living members of God's family. Paul in Ephesians chapter 3 echoes this truth as he explains to the church in Ephesus that a new mystery has been revealed in Jesus. Verse 5 says, "In former generations, this mystery was not made known to humankind. The mystery is that Gentiles have become fellow heirs of Jesus, members of the same body, and sharers in the gospel. This mystery has been revealed to allow everyone to see God's plan, and that through the church, the wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authority." Here, Paul is proclaiming the good news that all of God's people getting called to be revealed to Jesus, that this is part of God's plan, that those previously understood as insiders and outsiders are now members of one body. As symbolized in the audience that surrounded Jesus' nativity, all people are reconciled to God, called by God to gather and worship, shoulder to shoulder in unity, one with God and one with one another. And as Paul reminds us, such a community of oneness and of unity will show the decision makers of the world God's plan of inclusion and belonging. The prophet Isaiah uses language of one waking up to the revelation of being included in God's family. Isaiah 60, verses 1 and 2 say, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and the Lord's glory appears over you." Isaiah is saying, wake up, see that God's light, your light, has come. God has entered the world as a human, restoring humanity and making a way for humans to experience wholeness, completeness, and unity with God right now. Thomas Keating, talking on God's incarnation, the Word made flesh, says that Jesus introduced the principle of oneness with God through participation in the body of Christ. To say no to that participation is the primary meaning of sin. It is the choice to remain separate from God, where one is led by their own self-interest and self-protection. Perhaps when the wise men went to go visit King Herod, inviting Herod to come and experience God's revelation in Jesus, perhaps Jesus missed the invitation, too caught up and blinded by his own self-interest and self-protection, too caught up and blinded by his desire for worldly status, power, control. Herod could not perceive God reaching out to him, conveying to him that he was already recognized, accepted, and loved. And thus Herod just heard the wise men just provide a fact and not an invitation. Author Amelie Griffin, writing on the revelation of God with us, says that the star that guided the wise men was governed not by gases or gravity, but by God's desire to convey a message to God's people. To understand this truth, we need the eyes of revelation, not of rationalism. God's incarnation, God with us, is our reality today, right here. God is forever revealing the truth that Christ's light has entered our world and shines upon the dark spaces inside of us that lean towards self-interest and self-protection. We believe these ways will lead to survival. Though Christ's light is here to stay, always offering us another route, a reconciled route, a route towards that which we already have. Arise, shine, Isaiah tells us, for God's light has come upon you. You are recognized, accepted, and loved. You have a place of belonging. You are a living member of God's family. As our eyes become adjusted to this truth in our lives, we begin to perceive this truth in other people's lives. Competition has no place. We all already have that which we deeply long for. As members of one body and sharers in one gospel, God's plan of reconciliation becomes our plan. To act out of the truth that our light is here, that words like more and mine and contest have no place here, is to help others become aware that their light is here also. In a collection of prayers titled Be Our Freedom, Lord, the final Epiphany prayer, one titled You Are Accepted, reads, "For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to God's very self, not holding people's misdeeds against them, and we are entrusted with this message of reconciliation." Yes, had Jan asked me the question of where had I seen God's presence revealed this week, knowing that this question points to where did God reveal God's presence in a way that encouraged the spiritual journey, I would have said today, right here, right now, I see God. Here, as we gather together, having answered the communal call to come and worship God's presence, a reconciled people giving thanks and praise for God in our lives and in the world. God is with us, and we have each other. We are not alone. This is good news for the spiritual journey. Together, with Christ's light as our guide, we work to live as witnesses of God's manifestation, reconciling the world to God. This meal at this table is Jesus reaching out to us to come and see and consume the truth that Jesus is here with us. This bread and this cup are visible signs of God's invisible grace, that Jesus is here with us and that we have been incorporated as living members of God's family. On the night that Jesus was handed over, he took the bread and he broke it, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body, broken for you, broken for the world. Whenever you eat of it in remembrance of me."